there are gaps, right? There are gaps. This comes from this book. And so this is the last part of that very comprehensive review. This is a very extensive review. So you could actually read this and maybe learn something, you know. And so it goes all the way from 1948. And some of this stuff we'll cover, you know. And some of this stuff you have covered in other classes too. You know, the McCarthy, the civil rights, and, you know, we'll do some things with that. You know, so this goes all the way up, I think, to Carter being elected. Nixon. Up through Vietnam. I mean, they had a question. The furthest they've ever gone with a document-based question is Vietnam. Right? The furthest they've ever gone. And they've only gone to past World War II 2 times. Right? 2 times in the whole history of the AP have they gone past World War II. I have this sneaking suspicion. The 2 things, you know, there's always all this speculation. What's the DBQ going to be on? What's it? I mean, and that's a big deal. I mean, that really is a big deal. If the document-based question, which is 1/4 of your AP score, is something that we've covered, that's really good. You know, and if it's something that we wrote an essay on, that's even better. I mean, a couple years ago it was like on the labor movement. I mean, you know, we knew all kinds of stuff, and we'd seen the documents, and that's really, really good. And then a couple years before that was on like the women's movement. That was a disaster. You know, and so, but the AP is conscious of the anniversaries. And a big anniversary this year was John Brown's raid. So I was thinking about it the other day. That could be it. They haven't asked a Civil War question in a long time, something around the Civil War. John Brown's raid is an anniversary. John Brown is controversial. So there's, you know, sides you could take, you know, in an essay there. So I'm going to try to dig up an overview article and give it to you, just, you know, just for fun. And the other thing I was thinking is progressivism. There hasn't been a DBQ coming out of the progressive era in a while. Progressivism is hot because of the healthcare thing and, you know, government intrusion into the economy. And so the AP is kind of conscious of that. So, I mean, we're covering that pretty thoroughly. Now you're going to write an essay. That would be good. So we'll see. Go to page 99. Now, a couple of years ago I did this. I took all what I considered to be the important, it's blue pages 99, the important foreign policy things that have happened in American history. Treaties and other things. So I went down and I identified them, and I wrote a little summary of them. So it goes all the way through, like, I mean, on this coming test, if you go to page 100, the Venezuelan border dispute is in your textbook. It's going to be a part of this test. It's something we didn't talk about in class. Skipped it again because, remember, we missed all those days. You know, the open door, that's a big one. World War I, the Roosevelt Corollary we talked about this year, up to the UN Charter. Right? Then on page 3, and I don't know how many years ago I did this, page 3, or 103, I'm sorry, you have legislation to remember. And one thing that you would know is when we talk about federal legislation, the amount of federal legislation to know really starts to accelerate in the 20th century, because the national government just didn't do that much prior to the Progressive Era. So you can even see that when we're studying Roosevelt. I was thinking about that when I was writing things on the board. Hey, we're studying Roosevelt, we start talking about this act and that act and this act and that act, and all the things that he did would be the same for Wilson, because, you know, the national government was far more active. And so in the 20th century, there is a lot more legislation that you might need to know. But a lot of times these things that I've identified, these foreign policy things, are things that they ask multiple choice questions about. I think there are either 80 or 85 multiple choice questions. And you have to get 70% of them correct, with 1/4 of a point off for every one you mark and miss. If you can do that, you'll probably get a 4 or 5 on the test. So now, I mean, I'm going to give you practice questions. I have a practice test. I got all this. I have to send that off. But sometimes, undoubtedly, inevitably, there are going to be questions that we didn't cover in class, you may have read in your book and you don't remember, or aren't even in your book. I mean, they're going to argue everything that's drawn on the test comes from that outline. Even the well-prepared student is not going to know some of these things. Sometimes you just hit it. You read this and you say, oh, tariff of 1860. I just read that last night. And, the question happens to be about it. And sometimes that works to your benefit. I always ask the kids. Now, they're going to tell you when you take the AP test, you're not allowed to tell me anything about it for like 48 hours. And the reason they do that is because what some people take this real seriously. And so what some teachers would do is they would take the kids as soon as they took the test, and they would sit them down like we are and say, okay, what was number 1? What was number 2? What was number 3? What was number 4? And they would know. Now, they recycle these questions, right? So they ask them from year to year. And so they said, well, Gibson will scare you, so if you talk to them, they'll come and kill you and tell you this. But I always ask the kids, how many did you leave blank? And which ones didn't you know? And inevitably, now some kids, assertive kids, are ways, says, I don't leave any blank. Screw you, buddy. I'm not leaving. I'm going through. I don't care about that fourth of a point. I'm answering them all. But a lot of times you'll get kids that say, I left 5 blank. Well, what didn't you know? I didn't know this. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Oftentimes it's things that we didn't talk about, or it wasn't in our book, or cultural questions that we would never cover. They ask a lot of questions about books. And so the stuff you study in English, believe it or not, as painful as that might be, it can be beneficial. But anyways, in terms of this legislation, it goes all the way through the Great Depression, through page 105, right up into the Civil Rights Act. And so, it's a good thing, again, to do. Okay, I'm going to read over this legislation. Now go to page 107, last thing I promised. All right, page 107. This is, again, kind of my acknowledgement that there's a lot of things after World War II that we're not going to cover. So these are topics that I think are kind of like important that we might not talk about. We're going to talk about the GI Bill. We're going to talk about the baby boom. We might not talk about the Highway Act. We're going to talk about the domino theory. We might not mention the Tet Offensive. The year that they asked the question about Vietnam, we were talking along in class, and we were in Vietnam. We were in Vietnam. We were talking about Eisenhower in Vietnam and purposes in Vietnam. And the day before the test, we said, okay, we're right up to America's involvement. Johnson is going to deploy ground troops in Vietnam, 1965, and that changes everything. So that was the last thing I said. And so I said, when we come back from taking the AP test, we're going to pick up with, this and go back, talk about America's. That was the first, that's where the question started at 1965. So it started right where we ended. Now, the kids were still able to kind of look at the documents, and we still had some familiarity, but it hurt a little bit. And it goes all the way up to the 70s, page 113. Well, anyways, this book is yours to keep.
It's amazing.
My son, my oldest son, he's going to be 24, I think. When he was like 6 or 7, he started to make the cover. So he's a graduate student at Truman State University in Missouri. So he mailed the cover. This doesn't show his best effort, but I'm always depicted there somehow in the cover. So this is his probably about 15th cover, and this is yours to keep. And these are yours to take. Any of these books, and I don't know how many of you have them. I have them in my room too. And when we start to review, we are going to, now let me just tell you this, Nicole Morrow, just very quickly. The AP is very, very big in saying that there'll be questions starting at like 1000 AD, or what is it, ADC or BCA? What do they say now?
BC, Common Era.
BCE, yeah, the Common Era. That they're going to ask you, again, they're very politically correct. They're going to ask you questions on Native Americans, right? Now, you might want to review that. The pre-European Native Americans. They may ask you questions on Spanish colonization. They may ask you questions on French colonization.